This is Wednesday, July 31st, 1991. We are in Royal Oak, Michigan. Welcome to Conversations on Utopia. I am Stephen Balkin, an associate professor of economics at Roosevelt University. I will be interviewing Carl and Helen Winter on the founding of the American Communist Party and on the nature of an ideal communist society. This will be used for a new course at Roosevelt University called Midwest Utopias. Carl and Helen Winter are members of the Communist Party of the United States, sometimes referred to as CPUSA. Both have been with the party for many, many years and have had varied positions within the party. They are experts and recognized authorities on communism. Helen's parents were among the founders of the Communist Party in the United States back in 1919. Carl and Helen both live in Detroit now. The views expressed by them are their own, and while they may often reflect the official position of the Communist Party of the United States, their comments are not to be taken necessarily as official positions of the Communist Party. In this first segment of the interview, I'm going to ask about the personal background of the Winters. How old were you when you joined the party?
Well, before I joined the party, I joined the Young Communist League. And I joined that at the age of 15 in New Haven, Connecticut, when I was a junior in high school. At that time, my father was the district organizer of the Communist Party in Connecticut, for the state of Connecticut. And of course, the principles and program and activities of the party were discussed in our house on many occasions. I was helpful in getting a youth organization started at that time in New Haven.
And around what time was that? What year was that?
That was 1923.
1923. Okay. And Carl, when did you join the party?
I joined the Communist Party at the age of 18, which was the age requirement for admission of members. But I was a member of the Young Communist League since I was 16 years of age. I joined in Cleveland, Ohio, where I was raised.
And around what year was it when you joined the party?
I joined the party in 1924.
And just so we get things straight, not too confused, how old are you now, Helen?
83.
Okay. And Carl?
I'm 85.
Okay. Why did you join the party?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I already said that the activities and program of the party were discussed in our household very frequently. And I was convinced of the program that was presented, as well as the fact that the activities that were carried on were interesting and uplifting and dealt with many principles with which I thought we should strive.
And Carl, why did you join the party?
What impressed me most was the fact that the party was formed at a time when progressive people in the country were opposing World War I. And the break with previous organizations that founders of the party belonged to, such as the Socialist Party, revolved around differences over the matter of supporting or opposing World War I. That was primary condition that impressed me very much. But also I was interested in both the Socialist Party before that and the Communist Party when it was formed, because I was supportive of labor struggles for improvement of working conditions in our country. And the communist movement seemed to me to be dedicated to promoting the organization of the trade unions, in later years particularly emphasizing the need for industrial form of organization to be most effective.
And how did your families and friends react when you joined the party?
Well, of course, my family was very pleased when I joined the Young Communist League. The friends that I had were mainly activists in various youth organizations that also supported the Communist Party. I was only in New Haven for a short period of time, so I did not have any fast friends other than those around the movement at that time.
Carl, how did your family and friends react when you joined the
My
movement?
parents were very active in the left wing of the Socialist Party before the Communist Party was formed. And consequently, they were very pleased when I joined the Communist Party. My mother was an active suffragist, and even at a very early age, she had me participate in parades and demonstrations for the rights of women to vote, which of course didn't become law by constitutional amendment until 1920. But that influenced me, and I participated in many of those actions. My father was supportive of many strike struggles that took place, and that impressed me very much. So that their attitude was one that naturally resulted in welcoming my joining the Communist Party.
Did you have any boyhood friends who were not communists, and did they have any particular view when you joined the party? Did they think it was natural, unnatural, or?
It was not of great concern to them one way or the other.
Yeah.
I had many school friends, and they knew that I was a member of the Young Communist League. And later, when I went to college, I was in the Communist Party by then, and my associates knew of my political views, but they didn't seem to be particularly interested in such matters.
And Helen, well, I know that the both of you, your parents had some important place in the founding of the Communist Party in the United States. Helen, can you tell us something about your parents and how they fit into the founding of the Communist Party?
Well, my father was, I should say both my parents were seriously active in the left wing of the Socialist Party for many years. And in fact, they met in the Socialist Party in the state of Washington before they were married. And their common views on the socialist goal brought them together, and probably that was very instrumental in their developing the relationship that they did. When I was 5 years old, we moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and at that time, my father was the state secretary of the Socialist Party of Ohio. It was the beginning of the First World War, and much of the activity around the party circles was against the war, inasmuch as they considered an imperialist war a war for the wealthy to get richer and the poor to get poorer. And they had street meetings very, very frequently, and it was at one of these that my father was arrested and sentenced, together with Charles E. Ruthenberg and Charles Baker, to 1 year in prison for speaking out in opposition to the war. They served a year in the Canton County workhouse, At that time, I was 10 years old, so in order to get a clear picture of what I did at the age of 15, it's a little bit necessary, probably, to indicate that there was this kind of a background in our family. And we were a very close-knit family, and our parents told us from day to day exactly what was happening and why it was happening and why they were taking the position they were taking. And by and large, we accepted their principles and supported them in every way we could. It was during this period that the left wing solidified its organization and became the source, the movement that actually fed into the organization of the Communist Party USA.
I just want to take this time to show this postcard. This is a postcard where it has a picture. This is at the Canton, Ohio workhouse, which is their jail, and the pictures here are of her father, Alfred Balkin, and C.E. Ruthenberg and Charles Baker, and it's an official-looking postcard of them in front of the courthouse. And I might mention that the Socialist Party that they're referring to is the party that Eugene Debs was head of, and that at this jail, Debs gave a speech.
Yes.
And what was the outcome of that speech?
He spoke before, he visited the 3 prisoners, and when he came out, he spoke to a group of people outside of the Canton County workhouse. And at that time he was arrested. I don't recall exactly what the charge was. I presume for speaking against the war. And he was sentenced to 10 years, which he served in the Atlanta Penitentiary. It was during this period that Eugene Victor Debs ran for president of the United States and received 1 million votes, despite the fact that he was unable to campaign. But the movement around him developed the kind of an election campaign that provided that kind of support, as well as the fact that many people in the country were actually opposed to the war, and they supported him for that reason. He did not become one of the founders of the Communist Party. The party was formed while he was in prison.
Debs did not
Debs
become.
did not, yes.
Yeah.
Debs did not become. It was formed while he was in prison. But he was a supporter of many of the issues that the party fought for, and because of failing health, he was unable to be very active when he came out of prison and died a few years later.
Did your father and Eugene Debs know each other very
Yes.
well on a personal level?
I'm not sure about that. They knew each other well on the level of the activity in the Socialist Party. Whether there was a social relationship or not, I don't know.
Carl, your mother was a charter member of the Communist Party. Could you tell us something about that?
Yes, my mother was active in the left wing of the Socialist Party before the Communist Party was formed. She attended several of its national conventions and participated actively there, and found herself in disagreement with many of the more conservative positions which the officialdom of the party took. And when the Communist Party was launched in 1919, she became one of its first members, and she had the status of charter member, having been among the first to join. That was in the city of Cleveland.
And what was her name?
Anna.
And, Anna Winter?
Well, no, Anna Weisberg.
Okay, it was Anna Weisberg. And was she a worker? Did she work, or was she a housewife?
She was a dress designer, and she was, for the most part, not employed. When I was growing up, she was on her own, occasionally doing some work for people, but she mainly kept home.
And was your father at all active?
He was active in the Socialist Party, was part of the left wing, also participated in Socialist Party conventions, but he did not leave the Socialist Party. He remained a member for several years afterwards.
So did that create any kind of family conflict with
Well,
him staying in the party and her moving on? Or they were close enough that it wasn't...
They were close enough, but there were constant differences as to orientation on the course of political action. And while my father also opposed World War I, as did many Socialist Party members. In fact, the majority of the Socialist Party membership opposed the war, and that led to a split in the party when the officialdom expelled the majority of the membership for that reason. But he chose not to leave the organization. So that, of course, they each went a different way in terms of immediate attitude toward current political matters. But basically, they both agreed on the socialist objective, and particularly the support of the labor movement that was emerging, and strike struggles and other actions of the people for progressive legislation.
And what kind of work did your father do?
He was a newspaper man.
Journalist or?
Yes.
And what newspaper did he work for?
That was a socialist paper.
And what did your father do for a living?
Well, he, at the time that he was arrested, as I said, he was the state secretary of the Socialist Party. He was on a full-time basis for the Socialist Party. Prior to that, he'd worked as a newspaper person. He worked in advertising, and he worked in a department store in Cleveland as their advertising representative.
And were your parents born in the United States?
My father was born in Germany. He came to the United States at the age of 1 year old. My mother was born in the United States and has a long heritage of pioneer background.
And so they were both native English
They were native.
speaker.
You can say they were Native
Okay.
Americans.
And Carl, where were your parents from?
My father was born in Poland, my mother in Russia. They came to the United States in 1903, and they made it their business immediately to join the Socialist Party in this country, insisting on joining English-speaking chapters of the organization, while there were maintained many foreign language-speaking groups of the party. They insisted on mastering the English language and participating in a way that they felt they could contribute more to the struggles of the American people.
And were they at all active in a political sense back in Europe?
Yes, there were. As a matter of fact, my father was facing a 5-year sentence for political activity in the Tsarist regime, in opposition to the Tsarist regime, and at a time in Russia when he was there. And that led to both of them fleeing the country and coming to the United States.
Was he a member of any formal groups in
The Russian Social Democratic Labor Party.
In Russia?
Yes. You must remember that Poland shifted back and forth as to its attachment to the Russian Empire.
I want to look at some of these pictures again. Here's a picture of Helen's parents. On the right is Alfred Wagenknecht, and her mother, Hortense Allison. Is this a wedding picture?
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember when they were married? Approximately?
Probably about 1906.
Okay. And then here is a picture of her father, another one of her father, Alfred Wagenknecht.
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 Wagenknecht, okay. And this was taken around when?
It was taken in Chicago, Illinois, probably in the early 40s, when there was a paper called the Midwest Record, and he was the acting editor at that time.
And here, this last picture is of your mother, Hortense Allison. And when was this taken about?
That was taken in the early 1970s. She probably was about 83 years old.
And did she have any type of official position in the Communist Party?
Well, during the time that my father was in prison, before the Communist Party was formed, he was the state secretary of the Socialist Party in Ohio, and she took over the position of acting state secretary during the time that he was jailed. After that, she had various odd jobs of various kinds, helped get out the paper. We had mailing bees every week at the headquarters of the party to get out the Toiler and the other papers that were published by the new Communist Party. And she organized a lot of these activities, as well as did what we call Jimmy Halen's work of all kinds.
Your father passed away in 1956?
1956.
And in the 50s, was he still active in the
Yes.
party?
He was active up to the time he died.
And what were some of the positions that he held in the party?
Well, at that time he was living in Chicago, and I'm not too familiar with the precise positions he held, but he was a member of the state committee of the Communist Party in Illinois, and held whatever positions were designated for him to hold from time to time. I know that he worked a great deal among the nationality groups. There were a large number of different groups of various nationalities who helped form the Communist Party. And up until the last 15 years or so, there was a very large active group, and the party attempted to continue working with them, not only with the members of the party, but through them with the various mass organizations that they belonged to go into the various movements that still existed, the insurance movements and the cooperative movements, and whatever there was in these particular organizations. And he devoted, I know, a great deal of time in Chicago to this. But that was his only function, not, I don't know. I wasn't in direct daily contact with him and didn't keep track of exactly what he was doing at all times.
In the next segment of the interview, I'm going to talk about the founding of the American Communist Party. So we'll be getting back to him because he was important at that time. Who were some of the famous people you met over the years?
I don't know what you call famous.
Someone, perhaps Paul Robeson.
Paul Robeson, definitely we met and had many exchanges with him. Earl Robinson, who recently died, the composer of
Ballad for America.
Ballad for Americans.
Joe Hill.
Ballad for Americans and Joe Hill and many other songs. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, who I think was a notable, coming out of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, and joining the Communist Party in her middle age, I would say, and becoming a leader of the Communist Party. She was a prolific orator and writer, and did a great service for the movement in general, particularly among workers.
Have either of you been to the Soviet Union?
Yes.
And did you get to meet any notables there?
Well, I shook hands with Khrushchev at one point, I had the honor of being a member of our delegation to an international meeting of communist and workers' parties, and he officiated there. The meeting was in Moscow. After that, we had another occasion to have an audience later on, several years later, with Brezhnev, and we met him. I was in Cuba a number of times and was privileged to have an audience with Fidel Castro and with Erich Honecker of the German Democratic Republic, the leader of the party in that country at that time. There may have been many others.
When you were with Fidel Castro, did he impress you in terms of someone who was going to lead his country on to further great heights?
Oh, very definitely. Very, very definitely. The first time I was in Cuba, it was at the Congress of the Popular Socialist Party, I believe was the name of the party, the Communist Party of Cuba. He was not a member of the party at that time, at least he was not present there. But it was 18 months after the revolution, and his voice was on radio 24 hours a day, with large numbers of people standing around listening wherever there was a radio that they could listen to, all night long. There's no question about the fact that he was a very imposing figure, and one that knew exactly what he was doing and where he was going, and he was able to mobilize the masses of the Cuban people in support of what is now a socialist Cuba.
Did you ever get a chance to meet Mrs. Khrushchev? She's always been a fan. I've always been a fan of hers. And
no, I'm sorry, I didn't.
But you met Mr. Khrushchev. Did you get to have any conversations with him?
Not really. It was just an occasion where you pass a receiving line and you say hello and express good wishes, and that was about it.
And Carl, who are some of the famous people you've met over the years?
Well, I had occasion to meet Brezhnev, who was the General Secretary of the Soviet Communist Party at the time. I met the Vice President of Cuba, Rodriguez. I met the Secretary of the Communist Party, which at that time still had the name of the Popular Socialist Party, Blas Roca, who also was the editor of the daily newspaper which was published in Cuba called Hoy, H-O-Y, meaning today. I also met Pete Seeger on several occasions, and Earl Robinson. I met Paul Robeson on several occasions, chaired one meeting which he addressed in the East. Of course, I knew Alfred Wagenknecht and Charles A. Ruthenberg, the founders of the Communist Party. I never made much note of people of note.
Sure. Well, did
You
Alfred
would call that to mind more than I would have had it in my mind.
did Alfred Wagenknecht, I hope I get the pronunciation
Yes,
right finally. Did he ever go to the Soviet Union in the early years? Do you know if he ever got to meet Lenin?
I don't really know. I don't really know. I was still a child then, and I don't recollect. He did go to the Philippines and to China in the early 20s, representing the Communist Party USA at various trade union activities and other international events. Went on 2 occasions.
I read somewhere that in the early 20s there was a great problem of famine in the Soviet Union, and he was very active in providing relief for the Soviet Union during that famine.
Yes, he was. He was the head of an organization called the Russian Famine Relief, I believe. Was that it? Carl?
Also Friends of Soviet Russia.
Well, the Russian Famine Relief came first, and he was extremely active in that. In fact, he was the leader of it, and provided funds to provide food to send to the famine-stricken people, particularly the children of the Soviet Union. I was then about 12 or 13 years old, and we participated in a number of little activities to help raise funds for that purpose.
And what were some of the toughest times for the both of you? I guess, Carl, I heard that you spent some time in prison.
Yes, I did. I was one of the members of the National Board of the party at the time, and the whole National Board was indicted on the charge of conspiring to teach and to advocate the overthrow of the government. We were all convicted because of the hysteria that prevailed in the country under McCarthy's influence at the time. But the Supreme Court, after I had served a 5-year sentence, acted upon appeals by other groups of communists around the country who were likewise tried and convicted, and decided that the Smith Act, under which these prosecutions took place, was invalid in its application to a political party which did no more than advocate its views about the need for political change, and was never charged and never convicted of any overt acts.
And your lawyer on that case
That was George Crockett, a man who served the government, having been in charge of the Fair Practices Department in the Labor Department of the government, and who was a member of a legal team for the first time, an interracial team of attorneys in Detroit, he being the first black attorney to serve in that way. And he also was appointed to the United Auto Workers Fair Practices Committee, and was in charge of it, actually organized it, to work for a fair and equal treatment of members of the union in the employ of the auto companies. He was assigned by a legal firm in Detroit at my request to be my attorney, and did a magnificent job in defense, to no avail because of the extremely prejudicial atmosphere that prevailed, and the campaign of all the mass media, as well as the judge, Judge Medina, who was blatant in his prejudicial treatment of the defendants and the attorneys, so much so that when our trial concluded, he summoned the whole team of attorneys who represented each of the defendants. There were a total of 11, to come to the bench, and sentenced each of them to terms of imprisonment for what he called contempt of court, because of their vigorous defense of those who were their clients.
And what are the jobs that you folks have had over the years in the Communist Party? What are the different types of positions you've held?
Wouldn't you like me to say something about when I...
Okay,
the
yes.
the toughest
Yes,
time
right.
that I had?
Could
That's-
have been as a
because
position in the
that is
party.
another that is another angle to
Sure.
what Carl just said.
Uh-huh.
I think that the most difficult time was when Carl was arrested, and the period of his long 9-month trial, and then his incarceration. And just a little over a year after he was imprisoned, I was arrested on the same charge here in Detroit.
Because you were a part of the board too?
No, they were arresting people all over the country who were active or leaders of state organizations. And I was a member of the state committee of the Michigan Communist Party, and 6 of us were arrested all at one time on the morning of September 15th, I think it was, 1952. After a week in the Wayne County jail, bail was raised and I was released, and then we began a long period of our trial. My trial lawyer was Ernest Goodman, a partner of George Crockett, and George Crockett was the researcher for our trial, so he was also one of our lawyers. The trial went on for 4.5 months in 1953 and 1954, and at the end of the trial we were all found guilty and sentenced, and then an appeal was made, and the appeal went on for quite a number of years. That's just a little footnote here which may be of interest to your students. When we were sentenced, the judge had in the chambers every monopoly interest that represented Detroit. Probably they took up every seat there was, all the bigwigs of the whole area, and there was practically no room for our families to find seats to listen to the final trial, the final proceedings. The appeal went on for a number of years, and I believe that it was in 1957 or possibly 1958 that the appeal was finally heard and the case was thrown out. We were acquitted. When we were acquitted, the judge called Ernest Goodman to his chambers in Bay City, where he lived, and all by himself declared that we were freed. I think it's just an interesting way of how the publicity works in some of these situations, where a lot of noise is made in one case and everything is quieted down in another, when a little bit of victory is found for the people. Those were very, very difficult years, because we had a small daughter, and I was very fortunate in finding it possible for my mother to come to live with us to help us out. It was necessary for me to find employment, and I had to sort of cover up exactly who I was, and the fact that I was under this indictment, and then waiting to be jailed, and so I worked for a temporary work service, 2 or 3 of them in fact, over 3 or 4 years, and managed to get by that way. Carl got out of prison in 1955, and I was finally, and he was on, what was it called? Some kind of parole? Voluntary something or other. He could not do any work for the party during this period of probation, so it was sort of like a probationary period. So I continued working, and he sought employment in the building industry, and was able to get a job through mutual friends for a period of time. So that we were in and out, I would say, of full-time party work during this entire period. Of course, it was a period of McCarthyism, and I guess I should have brought with me something which I've saved all these years, a notice it was put by accident in my mailbox saying that all mail addressed to Helen and Carl Winter should be turned over to the supervisor. The mailman inadvertently put this in the mailbox with my mail. He came by 2 days later and asked if it was there, and I said I hadn't seen it. And I made a picture of it, however, and I still have it, to show that that was one of the features of the McCarthy period, that our mail was inspected very, very carefully, even in the year of 1957.
Did either of you ever get to see your FBI file that they kept on you?
We're waiting to hear the Red Squad files,
Yeah.
which are now being organized. We're waiting to receive information. They're still collecting them. But for another week or so, they will be collecting them in the period of time will be finished for their particular job to be concluded. And our file should be given to us.
I never asked for my FBI file because I've seen too many of them that other people have obtained in their own cases. And they consist primarily of deletions, blotting out any sensitive information that might be of use to the person that applied for it. And I just didn't ever bother to apply for mine for that reason.
Well, these particular Red Squad files are not FBI files, however. They are Detroit and state police files, I believe.
Primarily Detroit.
Primarily Detroit. And that's another story. There's a whole history connected with that.
And since the late 50s, have either of you had any problems finding work because of having this prison record for Carl? And you
Yes.
never went to prison, but there were some records of an arrest.
Well, when I was released, the practice is to release the prisoner 10 months ahead of completion of the prescribed term, but continue him under the supervision of the parole officer for that period, to guarantee that he doesn't, as they say, participate in any further criminal activity or associate with criminals and so on. I had to argue with the parole officer when I was first released that I wasn't going to stop associating with my wife, who was under the law guilty of all the same offenses that I served time for, if they were offenses, which of course they were not. And as the Supreme Court later ruled that they were not, when I was told that I had to find employment, so that I went about seeking work. I made so many applications to no avail whatsoever because my prison record followed me wherever I went. On the one hand, the parole officer insisted that if I didn't find a job, he'd send me back to prison. On the other hand, I'm convinced that he or his supervisors were responsible for keeping prospective employers aware of the prison record and seeing that I wasn't given work. On several occasions, I was hired one day, and when I reported for work the next day, I was told one excuse or another for not allowing me to continue there. Obviously, the FBI had visited the employer in the meantime. That was a common practice of theirs. Since I have an engineering training background, I finally addressed myself to some construction enterprises in the city and offered to estimate their materials for contract bidding and make the drawings for their construction projects. And I did manage to get some few such jobs. I went through the motion of printing up a letterhead as concrete estimating service and used the business title to seek such opportunities of self-employment in that way. I was self-employed. I was never hired. And I got paid by the job of whatever drawings I produced or whatever estimates I was able to calculate and submit for the use of contractors. That lasted a relatively short time. But I would like to emphasize one thing that Helen, I'm sure, is probably very sensitive about, and that is the harassment which she was subjected to all the time that I was in prison. Even to the point of once, after one of the prisoners was publicized, not communist, but one of the prisoners in the prison that I happened to be in at the time, one of 5 among those to which I was constantly moved to break up any association that they thought I might have that would affect the thinking of fellow prisoners. It was announced in the press that he had been killed by some other prisoner, and that news was used to telephone my wife and tell her that I had been beaten up in prison. No such thing had ever happened. I was called into the warden after she protested to the warden and wanted information. He said he knew nothing about it. The warden called me into his office and asked me if I had any trouble. I said no. He said, do you have any difficulty with any of the prisoners? I said no, we get along fine. The truth is that I did get along fine with the prisoners. Many of the prisoners were very friendly, not that they supported my ultimate political principles and ultimate aims, but they were friendly because they felt that I was among those unjustly imprisoned simply for having political views that didn't coincide with those in power. And of course they had their own way of identifying with that situation sympathetically. But this was an example of the kind of harassment that my wife was constantly subjected to, not to speak of obscene telephone calls during the dead of the night, and threats upon her life, and constant following of her wherever she went during the day. FBI cars would constantly tail her wherever she went. I experienced something of that sort when I got home. Sometimes I engaged in cat and mouse play with some of these FBI agents and enjoyed losing them, and confusing them. And on some occasions I deliberately stopped and got out of my car and approached them and wanted to know why they were following me. And of course then they said, who, me? I'm not following you, we're just riding on the highway. And I demanded their credentials, and they said, what credentials? I said, well, you're an FBI man, why don't you own up to it? They were mum. They rolled up the window and refused to talk. But it was obvious that this was a part of organized governmental harassment.
How old was your daughter at this time?
When Carl went to prison, she was 9 years old.
And did she get picked on at school for having famous parents who got in trouble?
Well, she didn't tell us she did. She may have, and if she did, she handled it pretty well. Fortunately, she had a couple of teachers that looked over her. There were 2 particular incidents that I recall. One, when I was arrested, a teacher in her school at Angel School, I believe, in Detroit, went to her and told her that she knew that her mother was in difficulty. If she needed any help, just come and see her. And another incident, a year or 2 later, she was in the middle school, and I went to see the teacher on a parents' evening, and was very warmly welcomed by her. And she asked me immediately, are you of the Winter family? And I said yes, and then she told me who she was. She belonged to a social science studies group with a progressive person who lived in one of the suburbs, and they studied all the information they could get about the trial situation, what was going on, and so on. So she said to me, "Don't worry about Michelle. If there's ever any problem, I'll see that she's taken care of." So there were some very good things that happened, while at the same time there were these incidents that Carl spoke about, which were pretty difficult to handle at the time. I should tell you just one thing about my job, one experience I had. I never quite knew, because these were temporary jobs that I was on, whether I was cut off because the job finished or whether they found out who I was. There was no indication of that. But there was one situation where I was sent by one of the agencies to a factory in the southwest part of the city, a small factory, and I worked there and was called back 2 or 3 times by the people there through the agency. And then they asked me if I would leave the agency and work for them. And I agreed to do it, and probably worked for 2 or 3 months. Around Christmas time, the first person that I worked for there met me in the hallway and said to me, "Helen, what's the sheriff looking for you for?" And I said, "Well, I have no idea. Why don't you ask him?" And that same day, later in the day, I was called in by the personnel manager and told that my services were not needed. So that is definitely a situation where I was fired because of who I was. That's the only proof I really have of that particular situation.
And just as the last thing, could you briefly describe some of the official jobs that you've had in the Communist Party over the years?
Well, I was sort of specialized in the matter of organization, and held a number of positions that dealt with organizational policies and practices of the party, and organizing clubs, and organizing sections, and organizing areas of work. I can say that in sort of a general sense. In Minnesota, during the war years, I was the Twin Counties organizer of the Communist Party, that is St. Paul and Minneapolis. Later on, we moved to Los Angeles for a brief period of time. At that time, I was the membership secretary of a very large county organization for the party. After that, we moved to Michigan, and I worked in any number of positions of the party, organizational secretary, membership secretary, director of publications and literature, and so on. In 1965, Carl and I were asked to move to New York, and at that time I worked as the assistant organizational secretary of the party nationally, and later on became the international relations secretary of the party, and was in that position for a number of years until 1983, when we moved back to Michigan.
I'd like that you mentioned that you were organizational secretary of the Ohio district.
Oh, I missed that. That was prior to Minnesota. I was the organizational secretary of the Ohio district of the party. It would be interesting for you to know that soon after we moved to New York, I was stopped at least 4 times on the street by an FBI agent asking if I would talk to them as I was walking from the place we lived to the office.
And did you ever talk to them?
Of course not. Why should I talk to them? All they want to do is pick your brains about things. I stopped dead in my tracks once and asked the agent for his identification, and he pulled out his card, and his hand shook so hard I was afraid he was going to drop it. He was scared to death of me. I don't know how he was going to interview me, but that was the situation.
You never handed him a daily work or say,
Of course not.
keep up with current events or something?
No, I didn't even suggest it to him.
The object of those
It's just-
harassing attempts at interview was to get people to defect. They were looking for people to become informants for the government. And I say that because in my trial, any number of people who testified for the prosecution were just that kind of people. Well, for example, one was a bigamist, and as the price for being saved from prosecution, he testified against the party, saying that he used to be a member of the party years ago, and he would talk about things that never happened to try to lend credence to the charge against the defendants. There were others. There was one, for example, who claimed to have known the defendants, and as it turned out, he didn't know any of us, which was proven by the fact that we always were ordered by the judge to sit in assigned seats behind the defense table. The judge said that was for his convenience to be able to identify us by name. As it happened, we reassembled once after a recess, and in the scurry of being late, we didn't take the assigned seats, and this man was on the stand. In fact, it happened to be none other than Phildrick, who made a living for years afterwards by producing the film I Was an FBI Agent, or I Lived Three Lives.
I led 3 lives.
I Led Three
Yeah.
Lives, yes, that was it. So he was asked by the prosecuting attorney to identify the defendants. Did he know them? And this was to establish his credibility in the eyes of the jury. He called me by the name of one of the other defendants. He called several of them by other than their own names, and discredited himself, of course. That didn't stop him from being a government witness even after that. But this is what the FBI agents were soliciting when they would stop members of the party on the street, say, "Do you want to talk to me?" They were soliciting that kind of service.
Do you know if Phildrick was ever a member of the Communist Party?
I don't know.
Either for real or any...
No, I don't know. I strongly suspect he was not, though he claimed to have been a member of the party somewhere in Massachusetts. But he gave a cock and bull story about how he built himself a secret cabinet in his attic, and all kinds of fantastic tales to make the thing sound like a dime murder mystery or something. But that's why I'm convinced that it was all a cock and bull story.
And what were some of the positions that you had in the party over the years?
Well, I was a member of the National Board for many years. I was, for a short time, the National Labor Secretary of the party. I was Education Director of the Ohio District. Later, the Secretary of the Minnesota North Dakota District. Then the Secretary of the Southern California District.
And then Michigan.
Oh yes, and then that came from California to Michigan, where I was State Secretary of the party. And I served in this latter capacity over a period of about 20 years.
There's something called a Central Committee?
The National Committee is the former Central Committee. It changed its name to correspond to the practice of other political parties of a national character. It used to be called the Central Committee. It's now called the National Committee.
Carl was also the editor of the paper for a number of years.
Which paper?
I was the editor of the Weekly Worker, which then I participated in changing to the semi-weekly worker and participated in organizing a movement to launch it as a daily paper, at which time it was renamed the Daily World, and I was the editor of the Daily World for 12 years.
I've heard of a newspaper called the Daily Worker.
The Daily Worker was founded in 1924. It was a weekly paper for 2 years before that. In 24, it became a daily paper, and it was the organ of the Communist Party for a great number of years, until during the ultra-reactionary attacks upon the party and the general attack upon civil liberties in the country, the paper suffered serious losses of support and subscriptions and donations, and had to become a weekly. And I came in as the editor of the weekly and participated in the efforts to advance it back toward a daily.
So the Daily World is like the reincarnation of the Daily Worker.
Yes, it is. It was. Of course, the Daily World was succeeded by the People's World, Daily People's World, which today is the People's Weekly World.
And you said that you were a member of the National Board. What was the function of the National Board?
It is the executive body of the National Committee. It has the authority to make decisions on immediate tactics and policies between meetings of the National Committee. The National Committee, of course, is composed of over 100 members spread across the whole continent, and meets only a few times a year, so that the National Board acts on its behalf in the interim.
And the president, head of the Communist Party in the United States is Gus Hall.
Gus Hall is the national chairman of the Communist Party.
And how does he relate to the National Committee?
He is a member of the National Committee, all of whom are elected by a national convention that takes place every 4 years. And the National Committee elects its national board. The board then reports to the convention its recommendation as to who should serve as the national chairman. And the convention ratifies that recommendation or has the authority to alter it. So that is the way in which Gus Hall became national chairman.
And could he be unvoted out? And
every person in elective position in the Communist Party is, by our Constitution, subject to recall by those who elected them. Every elected official in the party is accountable to those who had the authority to elect them. That would be the convention. It would be, in the case of a district organizer, it would be the leadership of the district committee or the district convention. Every elected representative throughout the structure of the party is accountable to his own electorate.
okay, this is going to end the first part of this interview, and we're going to begin again shortly to talk about the. In this segment of the interview, we're going to talk about the founding of the Communist Party in the United States. When and where was the Communist Party of the United States founded?
The Communist Party was founded in Chicago on the last day of August and the first day of September in 1919. It was founded in the form of two separate organizations. One called itself the Communist Party of America, the other called itself the Communist Labor Party of America. The reason for the party taking shape at that time in sort of a twin relationship relates to the circumstances prevailing in the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party had been undergoing internal struggle over questions of policy, and over a number of years, big sections of the Socialist Party membership expressed disagreement with the policies of the official leadership of the party on such matters as the attitude toward socialism, not in the abstract or as an ultimate goal, but when it took real form after the Russian Revolution in 1917. Even before that, the officialdom of the Socialist Party was ambiguous in large measure about its attitude toward imperialist war. It spoke about opposition to war if and when it breaks out, but when World War I did break out, the officialdom backed away from the policy that a special convention of the party held in St. Louis in 1918 had adopted, namely of decided opposition to participation in that war by virtue of it being a war for imperialist aggrandizement on both sides. This was the culmination of a long period of internal differences on policy matters. And those who had a commitment to a more progressive and militant outlook constituted themselves as left-wing blocs in the Socialist Party organizations across the country. In 1919, the Socialist Party had scheduled a national convention in accordance with its own constitutional requirements. But as delegates were elected state by state, the national office did some quick figuring and discovered that the overwhelming majority of delegates who had been elected by the various state organizations supported the left-wing views on these matters in dispute and sought excuses for disqualifying these delegations. It reached the point where not only did the officialdom in New York heading the Socialist Party declare many of the elected delegates unqualified, but when protests were raised by the state organizations, many of them were expelled wholesale. For example, in the state of Michigan, the whole Michigan State Socialist Party was expelled from the national organization for that reason, that it was committed to the left-wing policies. Other states were either in whole, part, or in part expelled and their delegates disqualified. Consequently, a difference arose among the left-wing socialists as to what to do. Some said, let us insist upon our right to be seated as legally elected delegates to the next socialist convention scheduled to meet in Chicago on September 1st of 1919. Others said, that's useless. You will not be seated. It will only cause a ruckus. And what's more, the officialdom has such a clamp, that is the party officialdom nationally, has such a clamp upon the organizational structure that you won't be able to promote your views and get them adopted as policy by the convention. So that one group decided to make an effort to be seated at the convention on September 1st. The other group said, we're going to organize our own party that will be based upon the principles to which the left-wing socialists are committed. In the first place, opposition to World War I and support for the efforts to constitute a socialist society after the 1917 revolution in Russia. The group that met to form a new party was headed by Alfred Wagenknecht and John Reed. It constituted itself by convention decision as the Communist Labor Party of America.
And that was the group that was willing to go to the convention?
No, that was the group that said it's useless to attempt to go.
Okay.
The other group of left-wingers was headed by Charles E. Ruthenberg. Also a Chicago attorney by the name of Ferguson. They made an effort to claim their seats in the Socialist Party's National Convention on September 1st. Germer, one of the leaders of the National Socialist Party structure, called the police and had them herded out of the hall, saying that they are not legally delegates, they are intruders, and he wants them removed. They repaired to another hall in the neighborhood and met in convention, forming the Communist Party of the United States, of America at that time, it was called.
Wasn't that Communist Party of America also made up more of the foreign language groups?
That section of the left wing of the Socialist Party was greatly influenced by the foreign language federations that were a part of the structure of the National Socialist Party. I shouldn't use the term National Socialist because it has an entirely different meaning from Hitler, and it was never used at that time. I meant simply that it was a national structure of the Socialist Party. That is, the Socialist Party was a federated structure of socialist foreign language groups, so that Poles, for example, had a Polish federation of the Socialist Party. They were, in effect, members and had units or chapters or clubs of the Socialist Party in their communities, but they had a national structure of their own, which they convened periodically, and they conducted their business chiefly in the Polish language. Similarly, there was an Italian federation, a Hungarian federation, a Lithuanian federation, various groups of immigrants who were still making use of their homeland language and felt more comfortable in transacting political business when they could meet with people of the same national origin and make use of their mother tongue. It turns out that the left wing was largely influenced by these foreign language federations, and Charles Ruthenberg, who at the time was the Cleveland, Ohio secretary of the Socialist Party, thought that it was necessary to keep these left-wingers together. And consequently, when the party under his leadership was formed as the CP of America, it had within it a very large representation of these foreign language federations, and the party for some time continued the structure of recognizing the autonomous or semi-autonomous character of these foreign language structures. In the case of the other group, it was very largely influenced by trade unionists, particularly a very active and militant group in the Chicago Federation of Labor, who had close ties with the official leadership of the Chicago Federation of Labor, participated with it in many progressive actions. But it also included people who came to the Socialist Party out of the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, and the North American Syndicalist League, which William Z. Foster had been very active in for many years on the West Coast. These were trade union activists, and they played a very great part in promoting the independent organization of the party without going through the motion of trying to be seated at the Socialist Party convention.
And they made up a lot of the Communist Labor Party.
That formed the Communist Labor Party, exactly.
Now, in the Communist Party of America, the head of that was Charles Ruthenberg, who was a socialist from Ohio.
Right.
On the Communist Labor Party part was Alfred Wagenknecht,
Who was the state secretary of the Ohio Socialist Party.
and they spent time in jail together,
That's right.
and I presume that they were friends.
They were friends, and they both held the same views about fundamental political issues. They both had the same outlook about the need to bring about improvements in the conditions of American labor and to organize the trade unions as a strong political factor in the life of the country, and to educate for socialism as a future form of American society, to supplant the private profit system that prevailed and still prevails. There were no fundamental political differences between them.
And in the early 1920s, they merged. And
Yes.
can you tell us something about the merger?
Yes. Well, soon after these two parties were formed, in the fall of 1919, the federal government became very alarmed. After all, they were formed on the basis of criticism of the U.S. government's involvement in World War I. That seemed to the authorities to be a threat to future foreign policy, which the government perhaps would anticipate engaging in the future. They also were strongly committed to support of the new socialist government in Russia, and that displeased the authorities as well. So that very early after the formation of these parties, there was a campaign of harassment and interference with their meetings, interference with their communication. The mail, for example, was tampered with, and special attention was given by the government very soon thereafter to hounding the foreign-born members of the party, so that Attorney General Palmer in 1920 organized raids upon union halls and socialist meetings where the police would round up people in attendance and sift them out as to their citizenship and take to detention places those that couldn't prove citizenship on the spot. My father, for example, was detained in this fashion only for a few hours until he was able to produce his citizenship papers, which he wasn't carrying on his person.
And during that period, there was wholesale deportation.
This roundup led to a boatload, literally a boatload, of foreign-born people being deported out of the United States because they had been apprehended, so to say, in public meetings, at socialist gatherings, and were regarded by the government as a threat. So that the two communist parties were virtually, without any official declaration to that effect, made illegal. Their illegal activities were constantly interfered with, and efforts were made to suppress them with no legal grounds whatsoever. No more than there was any legal ground for all these wholesale deportations by the boatload, literally. So that the communist parties went through a period of semi-legal existence. That is, people weren't ready to announce their membership to unknown people around them. Some of them changed their names for sake of security, used assumed names in party meetings, so that if there were an agent present, he couldn't expose them to danger. But in 1922, a special convention was called by both parties jointly, or 21, may have my date inaccurate, in Bridgman.
That was Richmond, Michigan.
Richmond, Michigan. The delegates to that convention from each of these two parties came to discuss unification. They came ostensibly as tourists and visitors to the summer resorts on the Bridgman sand dunes. And they held their meetings on the sand dunes so that they were ostensibly picnicking, so that they wouldn't be interfered with by the authorities. That convention resolved whatever organizational differences might have grown up between the two parties and merged them, and the United Communist Party was formed. However, one of the delegates turned out to be an FBI agent. He observed that the minutes of the convention had been preserved in a barrel buried in the sand dunes. And he informed the authorities who seized these minutes. Fortunately, as I indicated, many of the names were fictitious, so that they weren't able to apprehend every delegate. But they did conduct roundups to try to arrest all of those that were delegates of this convention, who had committed no crime and violated no law. Nonetheless, this was the practice of the administration at the time.
Were either of your folks at the Bridgman Convention?
My father was there.
Yes, sir.
And one of the issues that I think was dividing the two parties had to do with to what degree the United States was ripe for revolution at that time. And didn't one party want to set up policy based on expecting a revolution soon, and another wanted to be more moderate?
No, I never heard of that. The outlook of socialists around the world after the Russian Revolution, which, by the way, was followed by a socialist revolution in Hungary in 1919, one in Bavaria in 1919, and burgeoning revolutionary sentiments in a whole number of countries in Europe, thought that much of Europe would go socialist as Russia had done. At that time, Lenin also anticipated that there would be successful revolutions in other countries in Europe, and that this would lend strength to the firstborn socialist republic by cooperation of these forces. That did not materialize. But in the interim, socialists around the world generally were hopeful that there might be other socialist governments set up in other parts of the world. There was no anticipation, to my knowledge, of any serious-minded socialist in the United States that we were on the verge of revolution in our country. They were well aware of the nature of the American trade union movement and its conservative leadership, the general policy of support for the system of capitalism proclaimed by the official leadership of the AFL. They were aware that it would be a long process of education that would be required before socialist ideas would penetrate in the ranks of those advanced to more effective social forces in the country, before socialism would be undertaken as a task of real nature, so that I don't believe that there was any such projection on the part of either of the communist parties in those years. Now, there may have been individuals, and I have in mind, for example, some placards that were put up on telephone poles, wooden telephone poles that time in Cleveland on some street corners, calling for workers and peasants to form Soviets. Well, this was romanticism, fantasy, but no part of any serious party's platform.
Was there any influence of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union to help get the two groups together in the United States? I heard that Lenin sent a message to Gutenberg saying, "Make peace," or something.
Yes, that's true, that the communists in the Soviet Union were abashed at the presence of two communist parties that had no political differences, that were committed to the same cause, and kept urging that they merge and that they form one communist party on a common program. But Lenin had written many letters to American workers, which were publicized widely, not just to individuals. He addressed public letters to the American workers, which are available in print. They're part of the collected works of Lenin that have been published in this country. And one of the things he urged in those years, for the short time that these two parties were separate, was that they unite. That what's needed is unity of people with a common political program to be effective. And I'm sure that that had some influence, considerable influence upon the two parties. The two parties, each individually, separately, applied for affiliation with the Communist International. The Communist International refused to accept them. Said, if and when you are united in one party, come and apply again. So that's the background of that situation.
Lenin wrote a book, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. What was that book about, and did that have any relationship to the split or the coming together of the two groups?
No, it was not addressed to that question at all. What it was addressed to was the fact that communist parties were being formed in Europe by former members of the Socialist Party who were particularly aroused about the betrayal by the Socialist International of its commitment to opposing imperialist war and reversing themselves in practice by giving support to their respective governments who participated in the war. So that the German Social Democrats, for example, voted credits in the Reichstag for the war by Germany. While on the other hand, the newly formed, the former socialist organizations, Social Democrats, in other European countries, supported their governments in waging war against Germany, so that the working class was urged by self-styled socialists to fight each other. And this led to indignation among progressive and left-minded socialists who formed communist parties in most of the countries of Europe. But what Lenin was concerned about was that they were so taken by the revolutionary fervor in Europe and the outbreak of several pro-socialist revolutions, which I've mentioned in some European countries,
Germany,
such as Hungary and Germany, that they saw that as the immediate task of socialists in each other country calling for the establishment of revolutionary governments, not taking into account the specific conditions in each country, the degree of understanding and readiness and strength of organization of the labor movement and other progressive forces who would give support to such policies. So that he wrote this booklet called Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder to chide these newly formed parties that were going off in what he regarded as a sectarian direction. That is, ignoring the mass sentiment, ignoring the mass preparation, thinking that only a sect which has a solid and desirable objective can produce social transformations. And this reflected itself in the policies, particularly in many of these newly formed communist parties, of abandoning participation in trade unions under conservative leadership.
This is what is referred to as dual unionism?
It resulted in their promoting the organization of radical unions, as they viewed them, and calling upon workers to join revolutionary unions, as they termed them, and not to participate in the mass trade unions in which most of the workers in these countries were participating. So that he said, you're cutting yourself off from the people that you need to influence and lead. And that is a sectarian policy. That was the purpose of that pamphlet, to call attention to the long-term task ahead and the need to rely upon mass participation of the people in bringing about social change.
I just want to get one last element in this segment. The name John Reed was mentioned as being one of the heads of the Communist Labor Party, and it's also the party which your father headed. Do you remember your father ever talking about John Reed?
Well, the truth of the matter is that during that period I saw very little of my father.
I mean, but in later
No.
years,
No.
did he ever
Yes,
reminisce?
he did reminisce a bit about it, but not in any great detail.
And did you see the movie Reds, where
Yes.
Warren Beatty
Yes.
plays
Yes.
John Reed? What
Yes.
did you think of that movie?
Well, I thought it was a very fine, fictionalized production of the situation that existed. And, of course, in a movie you never get the truth of everything, and a lot of the political issues were unclear, but it certainly showed the turbulence that was taking place, and the struggle that was taking place, and the principled attitude and activity that John Reed participated in, and was an active worker in during that time.
Okay, thank you. This is the end of our second segment on the interview, and the next segment will be on the nature of an ideal communist society. Thank you. This is for a course on utopia, and utopia has to do with a search for the ideal. And so in this segment, I'd like to get the Winter's view of how they see the nature of an ideal communist society. That is, communism comes as the last stage of socialism, and I'd like to hear their conception of this ideal situation. Karl Marx makes a distinction between the terms utopian socialism and scientific socialism. Could you comment on that distinction?
Throughout all human history, people have been seeking a system of society that would relieve them of whatever evils they felt they suffered as a result of those who were ruling over them. And consequently, many utopias were developed by philosophers and social activists about the better form of social relations, even to the point of experimenting with artificially creating societies in limited communities that could practice what they regarded as a more humane form of existence. Our country was no exception. We've had a whole number. Jamestown, Harmony, Indiana, many other places in our country, efforts were made to set up these supposedly ideal communities. And many wrote in the middle of the 19th century about the possibility of attaining such a way of life universally. Marx and his co-worker Frederick Engels were part of these socialist thinkers for a time, but very quickly perceived that what was being talked about was pie in the sky, because no material preconditions were recognized as requirements for the realization of these objectives. So that Marx sought out the motive force in modern society that has brought it to its condition at that time, out of slavery, out of feudalism, and foretold that under capitalism, which came out of feudalism, a socialist form of society would take shape, provided certain other things were done. And so he addressed himself to exploring what are the social laws of change. He spent years in the museum in London studying economics, for example, the economics of capitalism. As a result, he published a 3-volume, or were published 3 volumes of his work on the laws of capitalist development, in the course of which he showed that the very operations of this society produce a class of people who have no choice, if they are to free themselves economically and socially and politically, but to put an end to the system of private ownership for capitalist gain, and to organize along socialist lines. He therefore distinguished between what he called scientific socialism, that based itself upon the scientifically discovered and analyzed laws of social development, and the utopian socialists who merely projected an ideal goal with no relation to what are the material forces in the world necessary to bring it about.
The utopian socialists have been criticized by Marxists for 4 problems. One, that the utopian socialists had historical narrowness. 2, that they were crude equalitarianism. 3, that they practiced universal aestheticism. And D, that they had unrealizable ways and means to achieve their world. I think that last point is what you were talking about, that they had no system to achieve that on a large scale. But I wonder if you could comment on the first 3, historical narrowness.
Yes. For example, in our country, some people who were critical of the capital system for good reasons like to point to the early communal life of the Native American Indians and to say this is a natural quality of man, and all we have to do is go back to that and all live that way in equal communal society. That's a fine ideal, but it is utopian for the reasons that I tried to indicate. It's ahistorical, unhistorical. One must always examine social questions in the context of their time and circumstance and assess what are the material forces with which one must deal if one is to bring about progressive change. Consequently, Marx paid great attention to the history of feudalism, the history of capitalism, and was able, therefore, to project the possibility and the necessity, as he viewed it, of a new form of social organization, namely socialism.
And the criticism of crude equalitarianism?
Yes, many people who are committed to the ideal of an equalitarian society think that all that is necessary is to eradicate at one fell swoop all distinctions of social benefit, wage levels, for example, and by declaring everyone equal and creating all the availability of all material goods of life on equal terms, one would have communal society. But that is unworkable, obviously, for many reasons. First, because the material resources are not available for an equal distribution to the whole human race at given stages of historical development of a given society. And the job of socialists is to help bring about that condition where there is sufficient abundance. In fact, the condition for communist society is the presence of an abundance of all the material needs and cultural requirements for a full humanistic existence of all people. Abundance, that's the word, and that is a scientific contribution that Marx made.
And the third criticism of the utopians, is that they practice universalist asceticism.
Yes, well, it's a form of protest against the distorting effects of an exploitive society upon human relations, and they think that that can be remedied by everybody just making a firm resolve to lead an exemplary personal life. But it means to ignore all the material reasons in one's surroundings that compel different kind of behavior. And so asceticism is no part of any serious movement that wants to bring about progressive social change.
What comes to mind are the hippie communes of the 60s, where they went back to nature and tried to live without plumbing and in very simple ways. Would that be an example of asceticism that was not leading to a progressive vanguard of revolution?
Well, I'm not aware that they were particularly ascetics. They may have gone back to primitive material conditions, their communes, but they had other practices which were by no means ascetic. They were self-indulgent, and in short, they were concerned with the individual isolated from society. And social change requires identification with one's fellow man and organized action of the community on a large scale to bring about change.
I'd like to ask you, what is your view of an ideal communist society where capitalism has led to socialism and we're to the final stage of socialism leading to the world of communism? What do you envision that world and that state of society to be like?
Well, I would demur first about capitalism leading to socialism. Capitalism is dedicated to the preservation of capitalism. The reason that Marxists consider that the conditions under capitalism prepare the ground for socialism, if there is present a conscious, active social force of considerable magnitude to willfully take advantage of the opportunities to create different social relations. So that the term communism, if I may interject at this point, has many uses, some of them very inaccurate. I might, by way of illustration, call attention to the fact that you are called a professor by virtue of the fact that you had long, selective, intensive training and long experience, and have proven qualifications to earn the title of professor in your field of study and education. Some people might say I was a professor. I never got that kind of a degree. I never aspired to it. Well, what does the term professor mean in that connection? I profess the ideals of a socialist movement and profess some guidelines, as I see them, for bringing it into being. Similarly, communism is used in very loose contexts. First of all, communism is used to express the existence of a movement. And so all the mass media today say communism has failed. What are they talking about? There has never been communism as a form of social society organized anywhere in the world. That is still an objective of the socialist movement, the pro-communist movement. The communist movement seeks to contribute to the attainment of that ideal. But when one says communism has failed, perhaps they're talking about some political movement which they consider not to have fulfilled its promise or its objective. Now, communism itself is divided by Marxists into two stages. That is, a preliminary form of social organization following capitalist society, which has as its objective the contribution to the development of people and circumstance and materials necessary for living in communal communist society at some future time. But the socialist state, which supplants the communist order of society, is a transitional form of social organization. It has the task of taking society from capitalism to communism, ultimately. But what is its first task? Its first task is to preserve the power of the working class, which has attained political power and is organizing the state to introduce socialist conditions.
And I wonder if you could, though, get back to the issue of how will that ideal communist state look like, and then we can go back about how we get there. I just want to know, what is the vision of an end result?
The end result we seek is a society free of any form of exploitation of one human by another. Therefore, the elimination of the power of any person to control the life of another by virtue of ownership of the things that that person depends upon for his livelihood. The first condition for that being possible is the creation of an abundance of all the goods needed for a good life. Only if there is such an abundance would people not feel the necessity to steal from each other, to take advantage of each other, to subject one to another. There would be everything available for people to have a full life. Now, I've illustrated that many times at work when I was working as an engineer by calling attention to the fact that the fellows on the job were always grabbing for the drinking cups for fear that there wouldn't be any when they wanted one. And so drinking cups would disappear from the fountain in the office very early. I said, now, if everybody were certain that there will always be a drinking cup at that fountain available for me to use when I want it, would anybody hoard drinking cups? Would anybody deprive anybody else of drinking cups? That is the foundation of a communist society, where there is an abundance of all the goods needed to fulfill a humanistic life. Now, I can't predict all the details of its operation. No one has seen it. No one has been there. It has never existed. It is what we try to accomplish by several preparatory steps, which are the tasks of the socialist state to fulfill. Namely, first, defending the socialist state against capitalist efforts to overthrow it, which have been in progress ever since it was first formed. Second, to advance the technology of production to the point where a great abundance of all the goods of society are available to everyone. Third, to educate people in the spirit of life in a society that envisions such a future and therefore begins to practice some of the ideals to the degree that they are workable even in the transition stage toward communism. Now, if that ideal is attained, I can visualize, and of course everybody will have his own visions, that there would be people educated not in a single craft or a single skill, but the educational system would be liberated to the point where people might acquire proficiency in several professions. Doctors, teachers, lawyers, or lawyers probably will be out of style under communism because of no need for them. But engineers and so on. One doesn't have to spend his whole life in a single profession, only because our society gears the educational system to the requirements of capitalist production and fits people for a niche within that structure. But if you have a society where you've already attained the possibility of distributing or making available an abundance of everything that human beings need, including their cultural and social needs, spiritual needs, then people can spend their time acquiring many skills and many trades and many professions and move from one to the other as society may require their service. Now, how will that be determined? By that time, you'll have different kinds of human beings. You'll have people that look upon each other differently, that will be of a mood to assist in maintaining this relationship which they are benefiting from. The attitude toward other human beings will be altered, and that the preparation of that change is an ongoing process during the transitional period known as socialism.
I asked you once before about the characteristics of the communist state, and you said that's a contradiction in terms.
Yes.
Because in the last stage called communism, it won't be a state. There will be a withering away of the state.
Yes.
It'll be a society but not a state. And in terms of the operation of the state, the term that I used, that I read, that expresses how that last stage will be administered is called public self-administration. That's how we're able to do away with a state in the last stage. Could you comment what public self-administration is?
Yes.
It seems to be something on the order of volunteerism.
More than that, the state under socialism has begun to show signs of withering in many areas of its function. For example, in the socialist transitional period in the Soviet Union, many of the social functions of the state, such as the administering of social welfare, are not handled by the state at all. They're handled by the trade unions. Now, when they're handled by the trade unions, what does it mean? It means that the workers are administering the benefits which they receive. They manage their vacation homes, they manage the distribution of vacation opportunities, they manage the construction even of housing for their members. This is a breakdown of what had been, throughout all history, a state function, or at least supervision by the state, whereas now it is being transferred to a section of the people. Now that's a form of self-administration. It's very much of an embryo of that as it will mature under communism. But the state withers away only, not by decree, not by anybody's decision, only by a transference of more and more social powers to the people. Now, that means self-administration. In other words, the task of the socialist transitional stage is to prepare people for this ultimate period of self-administration by enabling them to practice it in degree, to an extent, as they are educated and as they are given the opportunity and, above all, the wherewithal.
The hallmark principle of communism, it seems, is the rule for distributing income, where the rule is from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. And two questions that come up is how is it made sure that there are the right types of abilities to generate the abundance and to maintain it. And then the other thing is, what are appropriate needs? Someone could have a need for drugs or a need for alcohol, which may be a personal need, but not a appropriate need for the benefit of everybody in society.
Those are things that would be eliminated over a period of time in the transitional period by education, by medical attention, by demonstrating in practice the benefits of a different way of life, by creating an atmosphere of mutual social responsibility. It doesn't come overnight. And it's one of the tasks of the socialist stage of society to prepare people to experience the benefits of this kind of a relationship. So that you find in socialist literature talk about the socialist man. This is exactly what they mean by it. That human beings themselves will be changed when you create a new set of material conditions for man's existence. Because the theory of Marxism is that the evils we witness in society are the product not of inborn evil in man, but the product of a system of evil treatment of human beings by a society that depends upon some taking advantage of others and living off the benefit of the labor of others. When that is eliminated, you have the basis for changing human attitudes. And how work will be distributed, how work will be divided. For one thing, when we talk about an abundance of goods, we also mean at a high technical level, high technology, so that you don't have to use a pick and shovel where a backhoe will do the job, or probably some unimagined perfection of the backhoe that will save human labor. And there's no reason why human labor has to be exerted as it is today for 8 or 10 hours a day. 2 hours a day might suffice, so that people would be free to choose. No one can draw a blueprint of what that future society will be. We're quite a time away from that.
Colin, do you have any last words on this?
Well, the last phrase that Carl used was that nobody can have a blueprint. And I think that this blueprint can only be made by the people who will be in the situation at that time. And that's not going to be tomorrow. In the meantime, the Communist Party has many activities and problems that it needs to work on, develop, and resolve. The whole question of joblessness, the question of homelessness, the question of budget cuts, the question of racism, the discrimination against women, and probably I could name 12 other such issues that the Communist Party is concerned with, is developing programs on, and is in one way or another active in that particular area, in that particular field, in order to improve the conditions of the people as they are now. And each of these, in my opinion, are stepping stones to the achievement of socialism and ultimately to the ideal situation of communism. But I don't think it's possible to predict exactly how that's going to develop. Carl has very well expressed the theory involved in what is projected. But the people who are going to get to that point are the ones who are going to have to determine that in the long run. And it may not work out exactly that way, even though those ideals are very, very much in need for us to have an objective. I don't know exactly how to express it now, but that should be an objective that we work for.
And would you say, just as the problems you mentioned are to help to change the nature of capitalism, So it'll be moving towards socialism and then towards communism. That there also is a lot of work to be done in socialism, like in the Soviet
That's
Union,
right.
to move
That's
that towards the
That's
communist ideal. And so there's work there for both the United States and in the Soviet Union.
And if one is attuned to the situation today in the Soviet Union, you can see that struggle is going on right now. How to go to the next step. What is necessary to guarantee better living conditions and what Carl calls the abundance, which will eventually create the conditions for a communist society.
Thank you. This has been Conversations on Utopia.